Moving forward with our 2025 rankings, we are on to the wide receivers. Today, we're going to be looking through different tiers, all of the players down to 55. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, my friend. I'm excited to be going through all these guys.
We have a lot of names for you. And starting off, we have in the S tier, the first three guys we're going to be looking at here are Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. Obviously, Ja'Marr Chase coming off of an unbelievable season. He, I think, is going to be the consensus number one. I have him number two, actually. I do like Jefferson a little bit better, just because I do have so much confidence in that scheme with Kevin O'Connell. And I'm hoping J.J. McCarthy is going to be an upgrade over Sam Darnold. So anyways, though, but this tier overall is really, really strong. CeeDee Lamb coming back from the shoulder injury, Dak coming off the hamstring injuries, got Pickens across from him. I just think all of that is going to help elevate the offense. They have no running game there, so overall, I think this is a really strong tier. What's your read on these three guys?
I think it's pretty chalk, the top three. I am excited to see the addition of George Pickens to this offense. And while that might cap CeeDee's insane target share, I do think looking back to his 2023 year when he was the wide receiver one, Jake Ferguson saw 102 targets that year. So I would expect those to shift more in Pickens' direction, and he should still feast. And hopefully that just means the offense is a lot more efficient overall.
Moving on to the next five guys here, we have another little mini tier in the S tier. So we've got Puka Nacua at 4, Malik Nabers at 5, Brian Thomas Jr. at 6, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 7, and Nico Collins at 8. So I think we have a little bit of difference between our rankings on some of these guys. I think I have Amon-Ra at 5 and you have him at 8. And we did land at Puka at 4. So this part of the rankings, we have shaken up quite a bit since before the NFL draft. So overall, I like Puka the best. I think he just kind of showed that he was the alpha when he came back from injury last year. And I know McVay loves him. They moved on from Kupp. They bring in Devontae. I'm hoping that can help even bring his game to another level as he gets mentored by one of the game's best. Malik Nabers, obviously the floor in terms of the volume is just so high. He was on a historic pace. He obviously set the record anyways in targets for a rookie, but just unbelievable target hog there. I think he's going to be awesome. Brian Thomas Jr., we love him. We were all over him last year, and we're still all over him.
Yeah.
And then Nico, he was the number one wide receiver in fantasy last year before he got hurt. So that's an interesting upside case to be made there. I know they added some weapons. They're changing the offense. The offensive line is still kind of a mess. But overall, Nico is going to do his thing and be that alpha wide receiver for Houston.
It will be interesting to see if the addition of Devontae Adams pushes Puka inside even more. So he was 29% in the slot last year, and I wonder if they'll put him in there even a little bit more and just get creative ways to get the ball in his hands and take advantage of that yak ability. With Nabers, not a whole lot of target competition. He's getting an upgrade at quarterback, whether it's going to be Russ for the full season or if Dart comes in at some point. BTJ, the addition of Travis Hunter is just going to be awesome to see, and I think it's going to be great for Trevor Lawrence. And I think I talked about this in one of the mocks we did, that the Jags have over 200 vacated targets this year, so there's going to be room for both of those guys to feast. And what BTJ did last year was on only 87 catches, so I think you talked about it at one point where some people might say his touchdowns could regress in a negative way, but it's okay, but what if they go up? I think there's a real possibility for that. And then I definitely applaud what the Texans did in the draft, losing Diggs and Dell and just being able to fill in nicely with, in the offseason, bringing in Christian Kirk as kind of a safety net, but then drafting the Iowa State guys, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of draft strategy for this group, in Superflex, especially in 10-team Superflex, there should be an opportunity to get multiple of these guys. If you have a later pick in the draft, right, and say top 4 quarterbacks, 5 quarterbacks go, and you have a chance to kind of secure a CeeDee Lamb and a Brian Thomas Jr., that type of thing at the 7th pick or the 8th pick, depending on where guys go, I think that could be a pretty viable draft strategy. I think these guys are all extremely valuable and all have high upside and pretty safe floors too. So I think you can really get an edge on your league mates in terms of your wide receiver 1, but then also a major edge at wide receiver 2 if you decide to start your drafts that way.
Sure. You bring up a good point with the floor, because I think, Amon-Ra, and, I know a lot of people are kind of talking about this, but he is just such a safe floor play. Now, he's scored a lot of touchdowns the last 2 seasons, finishing as the wide receiver 3 in those years. But even the year prior, his receptions were about the same. And, he only had 6 touchdowns, but he was still the wide receiver 8. So for him, it just really feels like 10 is the floor, even though they are losing Ben Johnson. I would expect that connection between he and Goff to just stay exactly where it was versus, maybe some of the other guys feel that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why I struggle to move Amon-Ra down below 5. Like, I understand the excitement about this group that I have behind him with Nabers, BTJ, and Nico, right? Those guys are all behind Amon-Ra for me because I feel like put him at 8, you're drafting at his floor at that point, right? All right, moving down to A, we've got not too many sub tiers again in here. And the first is AJ Brown, Ladd McConkey, and Drake London. We love McConkey, so it was so tempting for me to move McConkey over AJ Brown. But I just think AJ Brown is like one of, if not the best receiver in the league. Obviously, he's not going to get the volume for fantasy that you would expect from these other players. But I think if you swapped the situation for Chase and AJ Brown, we might be having a conversation about AJ Brown as the top overall player. It's just too much safety, in my opinion. And like, it just feels so good to put him into your lineup, knowing that you have just an elite receiver that, can go over 100 yards at any point. In Ladd, I mean, he's obviously just second year wonder. He's playing with Justin Herbert. I feel like the passing offense is going to be centered on him. I'm so excited to draft Ladd McConkey again. Kind of same with Drake London. He's getting a new quarterback, and I think they showed some rapport last year. And, London finished as wide receiver 5 last year, and I think that's definitely within his range of outcomes this year.
The only reason, at least for me, that I have AJ Brown higher is, with London, like you said, finishes the wide receiver 5 last season. He had this ridiculous target share. He, looked great with Penix, all of the above, all the stars are aligning. Whereas with AJ Brown, really the only knock is like, Saquon's so good. The defense is so good. It's the volume thing, right? He's got Devontae Smith opposite him as well. But should something happen in terms of like Saquon missing time, Devontae missing time, the defense just regressing, like he has the opportunity to be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. And I don't expect that, but it's just that upside is so tantalizing. And when I'm building my teams, at least for me personally, if I'm going heavy wide receiver in the beginning and I've got someone like, let's say, Amon-Ra, then I'm more inclined to take AJ Brown, where if it's my first wide receiver, that might be where I'm looking more toward London, just because I kind of know that he's going to be in a high volume passing system.
Yeah. So moving on now to the next part of this tier, right? And these guys also still feel very valuable, but they do feel like a touch behind those 3. And it's Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, and Terry McLaurin. So in my opinion, the guy that stands out of these 5 is Rashee Rice, because if he's fully healthy, he's probably going to move above this group into that either sub tier or even into the S tier. I have him at 12 and you have him at 19. So that's why he's a little bit buried in this tier, because I do have him ranked above everybody else that you see here.
I think he and Worthy go back into the respective roles that they were playing at the beginning of the season. And that's why I'm also a little bit lower on Worthy as well. And then, it'll be interesting with Garrett Wilson, right? Wide receiver 11 last year, and it was like, it felt so much worse. I don't know why it felt worse than wide receiver 11, right?
And like, even this offseason, I've been looking at their depth chart and I'm like, is Malachi Corley their number 2? And you're like, why are you so obsessed with the Jets number 2? And I'm like, dude, I just can't figure out who it is. Everybody else seems to have a clear 2. Maybe not Pittsburgh, but so I agree with Garrett Wilson. He's the only game in town. And I think, he had to deal with Devontae there towards the end of last year, and he still finished 11. I think that there's a chance for the volume to grow. And we saw DJ Moore be wide receiver 7 while Fields was his quarterback. Like, I think we can all agree that Garrett Wilson's more talented than DJ Moore. So I think this guy could be a limit here if Fields shows that he's at least half competent as a passer.
Yeah, and they have the historical connection. And I will add with Terry McLaurin, right? Like, his career stats have been pretty much identical, except for last year when he ran hot on touchdowns. And I think it was PFF put up something where he like doubled his expected touchdowns. But the big worry right now is like, it doesn't sound like that contract situation is all fun and roses right now. Like, he's really threatening to sit out. And we've seen when those things linger, like, just keep a big eye on that.
Yeah. The other thing with McLaurin, is, that obviously the touchdowns went up when they scored a lot more touchdowns. No other wide receiver on the team had more than 3 touchdowns. So I think that might be a little bit different with Debo on the team this year too. So, there's the argument for the regression. Now, my argument would be he didn't even see more targets than he did the year before in a better passing game, right? And we talked about with Daniels how he only had 480 pass attempts. Like, we both think that could grow by 50. And if he continues to get a 25% target share, you could get a ton more targets just by increasing the volume of the passing game a touch. So, I think McLaurin, despite the touchdown regression that feels inevitable from 13, I think the volume could possibly counteract that to the point where he could still be a pretty stable wide receiver too. Moving down to the B tier, we've got another subset tier here of 4 guys with Mike Evans, Davante Adams, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Tyreek Hill. And in our consensus rankings, all of these guys were between 16 and 17 and a half. So we literally were very close on all 4 of these guys in our consensus. So for me, I have Evans ranked at the top of this tier. I just think number 1 option, a lot of sameness there. I know the coordinator is changing, but it should be similar offense. And I just think the touchdown and the floor for touchdown and yardage is so good that we should expect to see more of the same here for Evans. I do really like the rest of this tier. I think we've talked about how boom bust. If you're shooting for the stars and shooting to be number 1, Tyreek Hill is probably your guy, man, because if they go back to any sort of downfield passing scheme for him, the sky's the limit. We've seen him be like a top 2 or 3 wide receiver for 3 straight years before last year. So, we've seen some offseason stuff too where he's putting in all kinds of work. So anyways, what's your read on this tier?
Yeah, I would say we spent a decent amount of time deep diving on, Marv and Davante. So, we can, point to that video as well. My fear with Tyreek, and I think I pushed him down further than you, is like we saw last year, like you said, the deep shots weren't necessarily happening. The air yards per attempt nosedives. He wasn't separating as much on deep routes. Like vibes weren't necessarily good. To me, it's just like there's a lot of like noise and distractions around this player. So for me, I'm kind of avoiding him just because I'm not completely sold. It's going to go back to what it was a couple of years ago. And then with Evans, like, just pencil him in for 10 touchdowns and 1,000 yards. You're going to live with the dud games, but you're also going to get a bunch of spike weeks.
Yeah, and the spike weeks can be 4 catches, 22 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So, it's just like...
Or 3, right?
Or
it's
3,
like...
Yeah, whatever it is, just goal line monsters.
And it's also, too, it's like, same with Tyreek, but when you're facing against Evans every week, for how many years, you're like, God, do I really have to face Mike Evans this week?
Yeah.
Like, he just presents that,
can he please have a dud against me? And then he just it never feels like he does. It's just like, this is annoying. Something I'll note on this tier 2 and on Davante Adams specifically, Sleeper currently has him ranked at 115 in their redraft rankings. That is probably the best
even
value
have a platform?
on the board. What?
Why even have a platform?
Yeah, like why even put rankings out like that, right? At least put him in the 50s or something. You can always drop him. People can always let him fall, but 115 is why it feels wild to me for Davante Adams. So make sure that you're taking advantage of that. That's almost as bad as having Christian McCaffrey in the 50s. So, but anyways, just wanted to highlight that because if you are doing mock drafts or you're starting to look at, different rankings in different places, you're going to see Davante just buried on Sleeper. And I know a lot of people do mocks there. So just be wary of that and make sure that you either follow it if it's going to stay there or take note that that's going to get changed in a significant way. All right, moving on to the second half of the B tier here. We've got 4 more players. And we're going to be looking at Xavier Worthy, DK Metcalf, Chris Olave, and Devontae Smith. Worthy, I still have a lot of hope for Worthy, and I know I rank him quite a ways above where you have him. So I do think that there's room for Rashee Rice and for Worthy on this offense. That's the thing we saw with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, right? We always talked about how kind of Rashee Rice was taking those shorter targets that used to go to Kelce, and they're still looking for a downfield player. So I do think that there is room for both of these guys to coexist, and that would coincide with Patrick Mahomes being a lot more productive than he has been. But that's why I have Worthy ranked so high here. Neither of us seem to be able to quit Olave. I think we're all both quite a bit higher than him on consensus. Obviously Rashid Shaheed, there's been some good reports out of camp that he's recovering well and he's moving around well, but I still just can't imagine it's not going to be Chris Olave as the one in that offense with Tyler Shough.
With Kellen Moore coming in, he's ran a very high up-tempo offense wherever he's gone. With Carr retiring, I'm in the camp that Carr and Olave just never really had a full connection. I've been on record saying Carr hates Chris Olave, and maybe that's a little bit harsh, but I'm hopeful that whoever wins the starting job, and it'll probably be Shuck because they've had a cup of coffee with Haener and Rattler, but I think in training camp they will lock on to their number one, and of course he's coming off head injuries, which is scary, and hopefully he can stay healthy, but it's not like he's coming in with a repaired ACL or anything like that. And I will say with Devontae Smith, I think at this point, like we've seen year over year, we kind of know what player he is. His stats are kind of nearly identical, and he's probably going to finish right around that wide receiver 20. And we saw in 2022 he and AJ Brown both had top 10 seasons. And again, what I talked about with AJ Brown, like if the defense takes a step back, they suffer injuries. If Saquon misses time, there is definitely a path for more upside. But Devontae's someone I'm definitely comfortable taking as as someone that likes to load up on wide receivers, as kind of like a stable wide receiver 3.
Yeah, and I didn't really mention Smith, but it feels like for him, he's excellent when AJ Brown or Dallas Goedert miss time. And it's been very consistent that he is significantly elevated in that situation. And I think over the last couple of years, he's seen about the same number of games where either Goddard or AJ Brown were out. So he missed some time last year too, but overall, I think he's one of those guys that just feels like an extremely safe player, somebody that you know that you could start again, similar to AJ Brown, where it just feels like he is such a good player. Now the offense is low volume, so that's a little unfortunate. If this was a high volume pass attack, this would be so different. These guys would be ranked so highly. So again, you're getting a really good player there with Devontae Smith. It's just the situation with the volume, around him makes him a little bit more inconsistent. Going down into the C tier now, we got a list of 5 players here. There's going to start to be a lot more players that show up as we start moving down a little bit. So with this part of the tier is Courtland Sutton, Travis Hunter, Teteroa McMillan, DJ Moore, and Chris Godwin. So this part of the tier here, you see our first rookies kind of coming in here. And Travis Hunter sneaks ahead of Tet McMillan because I have Hunter ranked quite a ways above Tet. I expect the offense to be concentrated. They obviously went up and got him, and I think he can get a 25% target share, even with Brian Thomas Jr. being in the same offense. So I do like the ball skills. I do think he's going to get a lot of short area targets. And so, we saw Evan Engram get loaded up with targets last year in the short area. And if that's going to be the target share and the type of targets Hunter is getting, he's going to have all kinds of production from a PPR standpoint. Courtland Sutton, last year we obviously saw him take a major step forward, scoring touchdowns with Bo Nix. So hopefully he can be consistent over the full season. And if he is, I think, he might even be a higher upside player here. We know he's very productive, very good player. So if Bo Nix continues to look for him as the number one and maybe expands his target share just a touch, I could see him turning into a much better player because he was much better over the second half of the year than he was in the first half last year. In the first half of last year, he was low-key kind of getting dropped in some leagues. So I think we can expect that not to happen this year, and I think a top 25 finish is almost all but guaranteed for Sutton. And then DJ Moore, obviously we'd have him a lot higher if the offense wasn't so crowded and didn't get so much more crowded by the new regime's draft picks. They went and took Colston Loveland 10th overall, and then they took Burden early in the second round. So, I think DJ Moore as a player is still good. He still could play that Amon-Ra St. Brown role in Ben Johnson's offense and be super productive. So this might be a really bad ranking if we look back and that was his role. And so, I think at this point, it's a good time to take a shot just in case you get a ton of upside, but it also could bottom out if he just is one of 4 guys getting targets. And then there's Chris Godwin. He's coming off the major injury. But again, he was wide receiver 2 in points per game before he got hurt. So it's just like, that's another one where it's like, are we way too low? Now, I will say on Godwin that I kind of expect Puka to take the slot role. And if they're going to keep the offense the same and Puka is going to get the slot role, that makes it difficult to rank Godwin. And the role is a little bit uncertain because we saw in 2023, Godwin didn't score a lot because he was playing outside and just didn't get the same level of involvement that he did when he played in the slot. So I think that there's a little bit of complication there. We definitely need to follow where these guys are going to be playing as we get closer to the season.
And last year when it was noted that Godwin was going to move into the slot, like, he and Todd Bowles were both pretty outspoken about the fact that that's where he thrived. And, finishing as the wide receiver 31 the year prior when he was playing outside, like Baker was a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year. So with Cortland Sutton led the way in targets by a wide margin on his team. And now it's like they take Pat Bryant, like people like Marvin Mims. They bring in Evan Ingram. The leading tight end last year was like Lucas Kroll with like 30 targets or something ridiculous. So I do worry about a target crunch there, but, would still expect him to be the number one in that offense. With Ted McMillan, I might change that a little bit and move Travis Hunter above him. But, at the start of the last season, Dante Johnson was getting like almost 10 targets per game at that same position. And I think, if Tet's going to be getting anywhere near that, I think with his big playability, I think that's someone that we're going to want a big piece of.
Yeah. And so on this tier 2, I think this is where you wouldn't want to go past getting your second receiver. I would prefer to have 3 much earlier than this. And obviously, if this is your third receiver, you're probably right in the right range. Now, if you only have one, you've got both your running backs, you've got 2 quarterbacks, you maybe went in on a tight end, and it just had the way the draft fell to you. I would make a point to try and get one of these guys. I definitely think that there's a drop-off going into the second half of this tier and down, where you want to be taking those guys as your 4th or even 5th options coming up. So from a draft strategy perspective, I think that's the way I'm looking at this. Now, like you said with Tet, right? Some of these guys I feel like have a ton of upside, right? If Tet's going to come in and earn 8, 9, 10 targets, he's going to be so valuable right away, I think. So like that's why I think you can shoot for upside with some of these guys. And I think they can make for fine wide receiver 2s, but make sure that you're attacking the position before or during this part of the tiers.
Yeah. And one of the reasons too, I guess, I was the lower guy on DJ Moore, and I've just never really been a big DJ Moore guy for one reason or another. But it's like they bring in, 2 playmakers with their first 2 picks, and then Ben Johnson gets up on the mic and, is kind of code talking about DJ Moore, talking about effort when guys don't have the ball in their hands or they're not the designed reads. And I'm like, yeah. So I was like, okay, like we know that DJ Morris had some effort concerns in the past, but at the same time, like that was kind of one of the knocks on Luther Burden too, like when the ball wasn't going his way, like effort on the field. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I think, for a while there before the draft, people were kind of, hoping that maybe Rome Odunze would step into that slot role, but that doesn't really make any sense. What I think he's just kind of be the X, and then these other 2 guys will move around the formation quite a bit. But somebody's going to rise above their ADPs quite a bit in this system.
Moving down to the second half of this tier now, there's some high upside guys here too, and I know there are some people that love Jameson Williams, and so seeing him down here, I have him ranked 32, you have him ranked 34, and like the consensus is up in like the early to mid 20s, I feel like, and there's some people that have him easily inside their top 20. So he's an interesting one. I think we're going to have to talk about him or talk about moving him up. Now, the rest of these guys, Ayuk coming off of injury, so that's why he's down here. Obviously, he could be a difference maker in the second half, but that's not somebody you want to rely on as your 2 early in the year. Zay Flowers is very game script dependent, so it's kind of tough knowing that he could either boom or bust in any given week. I mean, the number of 1 catch for 10-yard type of games he had last year was so infuriating. And then Jordan Addison, he's obviously great, right, when he gets the ball, and he's an explosive player, but just, again, so much boom bust in his game that it just makes me nervous to have to rely on him as a starter.
Yeah, those 3, Ayuk, we'll see what happens. We'll see how healthy he looks throughout training camp. But those 3 are like the best ball boys. in the
Yeah.
biggest sense of the term. And it's funny because you look at Addison's like stat line this last couple of years, you're like, wow, that looks really consistent. And then you look closer and you're like, oh my gosh, there's just so high variance where it's tougher with him to predict. Like at least with at least with Flowers, it's like, okay, they're a 10-point favorite. Like Flowers might get 3 targets, so it's a little bit more predictable. But it's like, I have a tough time with Flowers, and you're right. We'll probably spend more time on this tier specifically, but it's like, what else could have gone right for Baltimore last year? Like they won all these games, they scored a bunch of points. Like Flowers was the leading target earner, but he was still the wide receiver 36 in points per game. And it's like, I know there's talking about like trying to get him the ball more, but I'm like, is that like really necessary when you're just dominating on the ground? So that'll be interesting. And then, my point with Jameson Williams, I will say, is like so many of his touchdowns were like just ridiculous. Like 6 of his 7 touchdowns were over 35 yards. 4 of those were over 50 yards. The Lions are projected to score 1 fewer touchdowns per game. Like there's just a lot that has to break right when you only catch 50 passes and you ended up as the wide receiver 19. So I think I'm just going to be out on him and just recognize the fact that I love the talent. I love the player. I love watching him. I'm just, if I talk myself up too much to push him up, then if it doesn't pan out and be like, okay, well, yeah, all these underlying things. But I don't think we've ever talked about this guy. What do you think about Isaac Tesla? Like the fact that they gave up 2 future thirds for a guy that they could have gotten maybe in the 5th round. Like I can't really wrap my head around all of that and what role he's going to play in this offense.
So I don't know that he's going to play any role now, right? I think he is
right. Fair.
I think they're looking forward at their future financials, and they hope that he can turn into Jameson Williams, right? And that he can turn into a productive player in that role, so that when Jameson Williams' contract comes due, that they're going to let him walk, and Tesla is going to be the heir apparent for that role. Now, whether or not that pans out, I don't know, right? I mean, I think that was kind of the idea for the Bengals with Jermaine Burton, and look at how that turned out. So, right. you can give up 3rd round picks, and like I think we heard the Giants war room say when they were giving up a 3rd to move up to get Dart. Like if you're sure or if you feel good about the player and they end up hitting, nobody's going to miss a 3rd round pick. So, that's kind of how I think they maybe were treating it in terms of draft. They got a couple other picks back later too, so it was more like moving down. So I don't think he's going to affect his value this year. I'd be shocked if he was going to affect anything in a major way. I think there are targets to be had in that Khalif Raymond, Josh Reynolds type of role that's more annoying than it is, making any sort of impact.
And I'm with you. It was just bizarre because it didn't really seem like a guy that was like on anyone's radar. It seemed like a guy they could have gotten later. Like I know Dan Campbell was probably like in his 9th cold brew at that point, but it's like but to your point, like had it been like Jaden Higgins or someone like that, like this could have been a much different conversation. But it'll be interesting to see what
I think I ranked 30 receivers pre-draft. I think I had a list of 30. Tesla wasn't even on my list. So I whiffed on him in terms of my analysis and my scouting, but I when they picked him, I was like, "Who is that? Dude? Like, what are you, dude? We have like 100 receivers that I would have picked."
I love college football as much as anyone, and I had no idea who this guy was, and he didn't really catch passes at Arkansas either. It's like, okay, I understand a couple years ago you have KJ Jefferson at quarterback who's just a tank that doesn't throw the ball, but this year they had competent QB play, and he catches like, I don't know, 30 passes or something. I'm like, I really don't know. I don't want to knock him because I know he's like a super hard-nosed, like Lions type guy, but it kind of reminds me last year of like the Andre Oshivosh thing where it's like you got this super highly athletic guy, all these traits, like can't wait to get him on the field, and doesn't necessarily pan out during the game, but who knows, right? But
and there's a ton of 3rd round receivers that like don't work. So
of course. It was more so like, hey, we're giving up 2/3. Like this guy, like it just seemed like they were going to make a point to use him because of how it
the capital invested. Yeah, no, I get it, and I know there are people that like him that have broken down his tape and that talk about his speed and his his in-game ability and say like, look,
Yeah.
this guy's going to be productive right away. And it's just some like, I don't think so. I don't think so. How productive can you be
Yeah.
when you're the fifth option on the offense, right? It's just not
Right.
going to
Yeah.
be
Not
a
like
thing
a
for him.
fantasy relevant. I just,
No.
yeah.
Yeah, even in rookie drafts, I've seen him getting pushed in the second round of 12-team rookie drafts, or 2-3 turn type of area, and I'm like, I just can't. There's just not a clear enough pathway, even if somebody gets hurt, for him to be productive. So, anyways, that's where I'm at on him, and I think JMO is somebody that's going to be as polarizing as anybody in rankings, and I think I'm going to probably end up moving him up. I did draft him in our Dynasty League. I do like him quite a bit more in Dynasty. 24 years old. Really only had his one full season last year, and he finishes wide receiver 19. So I do think that there's upside for quite a bit here for him. Now, in terms of safety and draft construction and what I'm looking to do at wide receiver 2, or I'm trying to get my wide receiver 2 really early. And then, so I'm maybe trying to get a little bit safer wide receiver 3 option. So I don't know. I guess with my draft strategy, he just doesn't gel with what I'm trying to do at that spot. So I don't know. Maybe I'll come around a little bit more as we get closer to the season.
It's the best ball tier.
Yeah, the best ball tier. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
All right, we spent a lot of time on that tier. I do like the JMO conversation. I think the whole area there, wrapping up the C tier, to try and give you as much analysis on those guys, because now we're going to get deeper. These guys start turning more and more into dart throws. We're getting down, probably into the first bench players you're going to be drafting. If you play in 3 wide receiver leagues, maybe these guys are still flex consideration, that type of thing for your rosters. But the D tier is going to have a lot of guys here, so bear with us. So we've got Stephon Diggs, Rome Odunze, Juwan Jennings, Jacoby Myers, you're my favorite, Matthew Golden, Cooper Kupp, Calvin Ridley, Jaden Reed, Jalen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, and Deebo Samuel. So again, a lot of familiar names in this area, but I think most of these guys will be either flex consideration or your first bench wide receiver, maybe second bench wide receiver type of players. So I'm just going to pick a couple guys to highlight, and then maybe you pick a couple guys to highlight, and we can kind of just go over the tier, wrap the tier as a whole. Somebody I think that does stand out, that as somebody who could move up significantly depending on camp news, is Juwan Jennings. If Ayuk is going to start on PUP and Jennings looks like he's going to be the one over Ricky Pearsall, who we'll talk about in a second, I could see Jennings jumping into the top 25 receivers, and being maybe near DJ Moore and Godwin. I mean, we know that role can be really productive for the 49ers, and he had some monster games last year when he was the number one. When the receiver core was dealing with injuries in a significant way, and he just would pop off. So I think that there's a lot of room there to have discussion around moving Juwan Jennings up in a significant way. The other guy I wanted to talk about that we brought up in our rankings dispute video is Matthew Golden. I am just shocked that he's ranked so low everywhere else, and we don't have him ranked that low. We have him ranked in our top 40, and I really think, again, this is another upside case where if we're getting news that he is going to be the number one, if he is going to be playing on 70 or 80% of the snaps, or that's the way it looks like going into the season, I could see him jumping up as well. It's a first round wide receiver. If the Packers didn't think he was going to be able to make an impact, I just don't think they go that direction for the first time in 21 years. So those guys stand out at this tier. Who a couple other guys that stand out to you, and kind of talk about the tiers as a whole.
Yeah, I guess just piggybacking off the Packers with Jaden Reed, again, one of those guys where you look at his player card and you're like, oh, consistent wide receiver 26, wide receiver 23 seasons, but he's just like such a frustrating player to own, and knowing exactly when to start him. And for me, it's just tricky because like his snap percentage is like in the 50s way too often. And I do have hope that bringing in Matthew Golden, like maybe there will be more clarity in this wide receiver room. Now that Aaron Rodgers is gone to Pittsburgh, like we have seen some trade rumors about Romeo Doubs maybe going over there, which I think would, clear out a lot of space for Golden, obviously, and just make this all a little bit easier. But another guy, who we have lower on this tier and probably a lot lower than consensus is Jerry Jeudy. And where I struggle with Jerry Jeudy is like, okay, he was wide receiver 15 last season, but he was wide receiver 29 in points per game. And he had 17.6 half PPR points per game with Jameis Winston, 7.8 half PPR points per game without Jameis Winston. And it's like, okay, like I think Flacco can be good and support these guys, but like not to the level that Jameis does. And it's still the Browns. And like he's been a waiver wire guy pretty much every year other than this last year in 2022, where, you know, he and Russ had a decent connection. So that's one of those guys that I've never really been in on. And he's someone that I can see just kind of bottoming out and not, you know, repeating even anywhere close to what we saw in that, you know, small sample size.
Yeah, and another reason I think you and I both bury him is he's just in our home league. I know you guys probably don't care about this listening, but in our home league, this is just the perfect guy for Jared to overdraft. So it's just like we know we have no chance to get him in our home league too. So it's just like, oh, I'm going to write off Jerry Jeudy. So, but yeah, like you highlighted, I mean, it was the Winston factor last year, right? I mean, he was just unbelievably good. He was a top 10, if not top 5 weekly ranked receiver with Winston out there, but that's just not going to be the case. So it's like, I don't know how much we can really rely on it. I think that's why we were so excited that Nabers might get Winston as his quarterback, right? It's just like the upside with Winston out there because he's so willing to take unreasonable amount of risks that, you know, I mean, it can really help the wide receivers. Now, I think too, Jeudy was fueled significantly by that one monster game against Denver. I mean, he had like 240 yards and multiple scores. And so, I don't know how repeatable getting a monster game like that is. So overall, Jeudy, I think, is a solid player, right? It's somebody that I probably should rank higher than this, but, you know, I have him 41. So I still feel like, again, like he can be a first or second bench receiver. And if he turns into something like that, or if it is Flacco to start the year, you know, maybe you do have a flex option down this late.
And I've been talking about it all off season, and that's why I've just been taking Cedric Tillman late everywhere, because with Jameis, their stats were kind of identical, and, you know, he showed some flashes too. So if I'm just going to get a 5, 6, whatever round discount on that, like I'm just going to take that chance.
Yeah, and I like that call, you know, especially if Judy's going to get pushed up into the top 30. You know, I mean, there's some really good names here that we're trying to highlight, right? I mean, we're putting everybody on the board and showing you, like, look, if you're going to move Jeudy up significantly, you're going to be passing on some guys that could be better or just as good as him. So, you know, and then Jacoby Myers, I mean, he's in this tier, and I feel like we have to mention him, right? Over the second half of the year last year, right? They had to figure out the Devontae Adams thing at the beginning of last year, right? He obviously got hurt, got traded. It was a big distraction, you know, for everybody. But once they kind of got their full offense set up, and it was Jacoby and it was Bowers. I know they added Besh. I mean, they need another receiver to start, so that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I think he's a perfect fit, kind of with those other two guys. And you know, Jacoby was a top 15 wide receiver the second half of the year. So it's like another guy down here. We're talking about Jeudy finished as wide receiver 15. Yeah. Like Jacoby was just as good, you know, over the second half of the year. So obviously not as good as Jeudy was with Winston, but just on a whole. So I think his role might be the same. I think, you know, obviously they have a brand new coaching staff, new quarterback, whole deal. But Jacoby has proven year over year that he is more than capable of being a starter for fantasy. All right, so now we're getting into the F tier. So we're going down all the way to 55. So these guys are more dart throws. These guys aren't necessarily as strict to rank in order. These guys are probably going to get drafted 11th, 12th, 13th round. So there's some value here to be had, right? And you do want to throw some darts at these guys, in my opinion. But it starts with Ricky Pearsall. I think we can talk about him here in a second. George Pickens, he obviously has a ton of upside, and his consensus rank is a lot higher than this. Then you got Trey Harris possibly taking over as the 2 in LA for the Chargers. You got Khalil Shakir, who might be the number 1 in Buffalo. You know, so there's possibly a number 1 wide receiver this slate. Hollywood Brown obviously getting to play with Mahomes is a pretty big boost. The 2 Colts guys with Pittman and Josh Downs. Then we've got rookie Emeka Egbuka, who's probably going to be the 3 to start the year in Tampa Bay, but he's got a ton of talent. And then Darnell Mooney, who there's been some reports that they're going to lean on Darnell Mooney, and that offense is very concentrated in those 3 players, those 3 pass catchers. So with Mooney, London, Pitts, I guess Bijan too. But it's very concentrated, not a lot of extra room in that offense for anybody else. And then we got Rashad Bateman, who just signed a new deal. So that's interesting that he's going to be with Baltimore. And then the last guy that we're going to rank here for this video is Luther Burden, rookie going to the Bears, who should be the 3rd, maybe the 4th option passing. So the guy for sure I want to highlight is Ricky Pearsall, right? Because again, same with Jennings. If it looks like he's going to be taking over as a number one to start the year, or even as a significant part of the offense to start the year, I think we need to look at moving him up. Over the last 2 weeks of the season, he was extremely productive last year. If you haven't seen, go look. He had at least 70 yards of a touchdown in both games, and his role in terms of per snap percentage, targets, all just ballooned in a major way. So again, this is dependent on Ayuk being out, but if Ayuk is out, Debo's out of town, this offense is going to look a lot different with Jennings and Pearsall kind of getting the keys to the wide receiver room to start the year. The next guy, right, is the Khalil Shakir, right, wide receiver one possibly for Josh Allen. Now, he spent a lot of time on waiver wires in my leagues last year, so he's a little bit difficult to judge, but if you're in full PPR, he's a pretty safe 10-point floor. Half PPR doesn't score a ton of touchdowns, so that caps his ceiling a little bit, but still could be in for, 8, 9, 10 points anytime you need him in a pinch. So those are the two guys that I kind of highlight or jump out to me in this tier.
Just to add on Pearsall and the Niners guys, I mean, look at the price that we had to pay for Ayuk and Debo last year, right? And now Debo's gone. Ayuk's going to start on PUP. Somebody, like you said, is going to emerge, be that number one. So I'm just taking a kind of a Neapolitan approach to these wide receivers on the Niners in best ball and just know that somebody's value is going to skyrocket because for whatever reason, they're getting suppressed quite a bit. And with Shakir, I get it. And he's a fun player. And I hear that argument quite a bit, but looking at last year, it's like, okay, he had 100 targets. He led the team in targets by like a margin of 25. So I'm hesitant to see any other upside when they add Josh Palmer as well. And he still finished as the wide receiver 38. And I think with Pickens specifically, he'll probably end up jumping up a tier from us. But, I've had Pickens on a number of teams over the years, and he's always just kind of been so frustrating to own. It's like you start the game 40-yard bomb, and then it's like nothing. And then it's a touchdown called back. And then he ends the game with 3 for 52. And I'm like, okay, cool. That was a lot of there was just a lot going on for it to be a whole lot of
hype to be let down. Yeah.
Which is just always been, my frustrating with him, but he's definitely getting a good quarterback upgrade, and, the Cowboys are going to have to throw it a ton. So I think I'll be moving him up, but like I said, I've just been kind of annoyed with him over the years.
Yeah, and that's, the very, very boom bust nature of his play style, right? He's outside on the boundary, acrobatic catches, right? I mean, he's very talented, but in terms of any sort of dedicated volume type of role, we've seen it a little bit, but it's always been 10, when he's been the one, if Deontay went down a couple years ago or even last year, it was just he'll get 10 targets and he'll turn it into 4 catches for, like you said, 50 yards. Or he'll catch a long touchdown and it'll be 5 for 110 and a touchdown, right? Or he'll catch 2 touchdowns and it'll be 6 for 160 and 2 touchdowns. It's like, oh, why didn't I start him? But it's just even on monster volume, he just didn't have a very high catch percentage because so many of them are coming down the field. And that was with Russell Wilson throwing the ball, right? I mean, think about how excited we were when Russ took over, and it's like, oh, this is a perfect match. It's one of the best deep ball throwers in the league, matched with one of the best deep threats in the league, and even still, his catch percentage wasn't that good. So, I do like him to open up the offense. I do think Dak is probably the best quarterback that he's played with. But, in terms of how much value he's going to bring, I think it's obviously going to continue to be boom bust. It's just those boom weeks you're going to really wish you had him in your lineup.
Yeah. And then I guess one last point on Darnell Mooney. He's probably someone we'll need to move up to because Penix, he loves to throw it deep. And Mooney showed last year, maybe better than any year in his career, that he can win deep. So I think he's someone I'm going to have to look into a little bit more. And I think I can talk myself into being a little bit more excited about.
Yeah. And, Mooney was decently productive at certain times during the year last year, but he did still finish, down in the low 30s at wide receiver. And so, we can hope for better quarterback play, but I think we're expecting a lot of that to go Drake London's way. And with how concentrated the offense is in London and in Bijan, I just hope that there's enough room for him in this passing game to be productive. So, again, great guy to take a shot on late in your draft.
Yeah.
He could legitimately be there in round 14 of your drafts, around 13 of your drafts, and somebody that you could feel good about plugging in early in the year, but especially during bye weeks or injury replacement. I think he has a safe enough floor where you're not going to be getting killed by having a 0 in that spot. All right. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. That is our first pass at wide receiver rankings this year. We're looking forward to continuing to follow the news, keep you guys updated, and get you guys ranks as much as we can. We're going to do this again before draft season. So make sure you drop a like, drop a follow, and check out our rankings in the description. We look forward to talking to you in the next one.